is yours to possess by faith what I could not earn, or surpassing gifts of righteousness, knowing you, Jesus, knowing you, there is no greater thing. You're my all, you're the best, you're my joy, my righteousness, and I love you, Lord. Oh, to know the power of your risen life, and to know you in your sufferings, to become like you in your death, my Lord, so with you to live and never die, knowing you, Jesus, knowing you, there is no greater thing. You're my all, you're the best, you're my joy, my righteousness, and I love you, Lord. Love you, Lord.
Let's just start off by thinking about, what do we value? Paul had learned to value a person above everything else. He talked about, just before that passage, the things he had had previously. The fact he'd been a man of status, a man of education, a man of great racial heritage, and all these things he was proud of. He says, I just don't count that as anything at all. He says it's rubbish, because he'd learned that the most important thing of value in his entire life was Jesus. Knowing you, Jesus, there is no greater thing. And that's what he'd come to find. It's very relevant because at this particular time, of course, a lot of people are reassessing what's of value. You know, I've actually seen interviews on television where people have said, one man actually said, new cars and holidays abroad, they're trinkets, he said. I've learned to understand that what's really important are the people in my life and my health. And so he'd come to understand that his previous values were actually wrong, and he now learned to understand what was really of profit and what was really worth losing, because he'd nearly lost his life, and that made him reassess his priorities. Paul hadn't had an illness, but he had had a very close encounter with Jesus that had transformed his viewpoint, and now he had thrown away, as it were, all that he had previously valued, and now looked instead to Jesus as the only thing of real value in his life. And so Paul discovers that, and that means then that nothing compares to Jesus for Paul. Jesus is preeminent, he's all in all, he's everything to him. And he uses three phrases in verses 8 and 9 there that talk about a growing sense of longing in his heart to really find Jesus, to connect to him. And that's what I want for us today, and as a real experience through this whole lockdown procedure and process we're going through. Paul comes to understand this. He says, first of all, he said, I want to know Jesus. That's the first thing in verse 8. I want to know about Jesus, literally. It's the knowledge of Jesus. To know Jesus becomes so important. Then he goes on at the end of that verse to say, I want to gain Christ. That means to possess all that Christ is and all that Christ has. That's his next intention, that he actually has to hold on, get hold of all that Jesus is and all that Jesus offers. But then he goes on beyond that. He then talks about being found in him in verse 9. Being found in Christ, where his whole life is bound up in him. And he expounds that then in verse 10. He explains how he sees that happening. Oh, that I might know him, he says, and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being made like him in his death. In other words, he talks there about identifying with Jesus, becoming so like him, becoming so absorbed in him, that the two become almost one together. Jesus lives in him and he lives in Jesus. And there's such a strong unity there. There's an identity there, an identity of being almost, that he just lives in Jesus and Jesus lives in him. And that's what Paul cries out for. He longs for that. He says everything else is rubbish by comparison. Just knowing Jesus, that is the key thing. And so that then changes the way he lives, of course. You can't have that kind of passion without it altering the way you then act out that in your daily life. And so Paul gets that point and he explains that then in the little passage that follows that, especially in verse 13, because he talks there about forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, pursuing a goal for which he feels he's been. So Christ gets hold of him and now he wants to get hold of Christ. And he understands that, and so he's straining towards what is ahead, forgetting what is behind, straining forward, pressing forward for what is ahead. And he has this forward-looking view where what was in the past is no longer significant for him, but all that matters is pushing on to what God intends for him. For us, our life has changed dramatically over these last few weeks. And I guess many would look back with real longing. I wish it was like that. I wish I could go back to this. I wish I could do that. And there's lots of wishing, isn't there, looking backwards to what has been. And we can understand that and sympathise with that, and I'm sure we feel the same at times. But spiritually speaking, I don't want to go back to what we had before. I'm looking forward to meeting you all again. I'm looking forward to actually being able to get together again and do things that are good and work out God's purpose. But I want to forget what's behind in one sense and strain ahead to what is ahead for us in Christ. Because I think there are bigger and better things. And I think, as I've always said from the beginning, that God is using this time to teach us valuable, vital things that can absolutely change the whole way we do church and the whole way that we live. We may not have a Damascus Road encounter, but I just want to see us so pursue Jesus and so be aware of the way he's pursuing us and speaking to us, that our lives are transformed and we are straining ahead, pressing ahead to whatever God's got in store for us. As we think about this, I want to give you a couple of illustrations, and then I want to do things a little differently. Last Wednesday, I was in another Zoom meeting, and one of the participants there was a man called Tim Alford. He's the youth director for the Elim Church. A great man of God. And he told us at the end of the meeting there about a picture the Lord had given him. And he said in this vision or picture that the Lord had given to him, he said he saw this great big red balloon rising up in front of him. Then all of a sudden, this balloon just exploded quite violently and just burst into fragments. And all these red pieces came fluttering down. And as he looked at these red pieces on the ground, he saw in among it a nugget of gold which he could pick up. And he said he felt God was saying to him in this, that God was in this time destroying our structures. All these things we were building up to try and do our thing, God had kind of blown that apart, and he was causing us to reevaluate what we do and how we do it, and to find in among all those things that we'd occupied ourselves with previously, to find the thing that really mattered, the thing that was really of value. And I really agreed with that, felt wholeheartedly that was something from God. But then on Thursday night I had a dream, and this doesn't often happen to me, but occasionally God speaks powerfully to me through that. In the dream I was talking to my brother and explaining to him this picture that had been given on Wednesday, and told him the story of the balloon and the little nugget of gold there. And at the end of the dream, my brother asked me, what does this mean? And then I woke up and the Lord was still speaking to me. It was like he was there in the room. I didn't hear an audible voice, but very clearly in my mind, the Lord said to me, you're trying to stitch the pieces back together again. And I understood what he means by that. Because the risk is that at a time like this, we've lost so much. We've lost all our structures. We've lost all our organisation. And the risk is that we simply try and replace that with the nearest thing we can get. So Zoom meetings like this are the nearest thing we can get. Or live streaming, those kinds of things. You still have a meeting. And you still do the same things. And we still have a prayer meeting. and we still have a Bible study, and I can't visit you, so I ring you. And so we kind of replace what we had before with the nearest thing we can get. Instead of stopping and saying, what are you doing, Lord? What are you saying to us? What's this really all about? And that's why I say I don't want to go back to just what we had before. We will pick up many of the pieces. We will go back to many of the things we did. But I don't want it to be exactly the same. I want it to be something better than we've ever had before. So that I understood I've explained that at length, but in the dream I understood it quickly. I just heard the word, Lord, you're trying to stick the pieces back together again. And then the Lord said, you've got to seek the gold. You've got to seek the gold. And so I asked the Lord, what is it? What is the gold? And the Lord said to me, connection with Jesus. That is the gold. It's connection with Jesus. Let me tell you another story. We'll come back to that point in a moment. Just recently I've been reading a novel, Dr. Thorne by Anthony Trollope, and in that there's a little part of the story where one of the characters, Frank, is invited to a banquet basically by the Duke of Omnium, and he has to go to this big castle with a lot of other men, all the important people of the county gather there, and Frank goes along quite excited at first because he thinks he's going to have the chance to talk to a real live Duke. He's going to meet in person with this very famous, very important man. And the story goes how he goes along there, and the Duke doesn't even speak to him, doesn't even notice he's there. The Duke sits at the top of the table and speaks to one or two select friends, and he doesn't say anything, he doesn't talk to anybody else, he just totally ignores Frank and the rest of the guests. And Frank is so disgusted because in spite of the wealth of the food there and the good wine and all the rest of it there, he didn't want that. He wanted to meet the Duke. And he's so disgusted he gets up in the end and walks out and walks off home. The rest of the gathering carry on feasting for 2 hours, eating and drinking. Even the Duke leaves very early on and just leaves the room completely. They're there for what they can get. And they enjoy the food and the wine, but they never get to meet the Duke. And I think meetings can be like that sometimes. We never get to meet the King. We can have big gatherings where there's professional musicianship and good organisation and really excellent presentation, and it's all slick and smooth and very impressive. And yet in that, you never connect with Jesus. It's possible to have friendly meetings and yet still not connect even with people. It's been said sometimes the loneliest place is a crowd if you're not connecting with people. It's connection that's important. It's not gathering, it's connection. That's the really important thing. So it's good that we can gather like this. Some of you have had difficulty connecting. And it's frustrating, isn't it, when you want to be connecting to people and somehow you can't get online, you can't connect. And that's often the way it can be sometimes, isn't it? You're struggling to connect and you can't get through. And somehow you're left frustrated because you never quite got to where you wanted to be. And I just feel that so much in my life at times. I just want to connect with Jesus. I'm like Paul. I want to know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, be made like him in his death. I want that. I want to connect with Jesus because that is all important. It's all that's important. I love meeting with you lovely people, but if that's all it is, I've totally missed the point. If all you get is just seeing the happy faces here and enjoying saying hello to people, you've missed the point. Your point of being here is that today you connect with Jesus, that you know his presence where you are, that you hear his voice, that you speak to him in your worship, that you give something from your heart and your mind to him today, because that's the important thing. And it's not just about meetings either, because the point of all this, of course, is that becomes our lifestyle. Our lifestyle is all about a daily connection with Jesus, that he lives in us and we live in him. That like Paul could say that I identify myself with him because he's identified himself with me. I lay hold of that for which he laid hold of me. Jesus came first to us and laid his hands on us, and he's laid hold of us. And his desire now is that we lay hold of him with all that we've got and cling to him, so that our whole life is caught up with living for Jesus, connected to him, so that his power flows through us, his love flows through us, his life is made known through the words and the works that are demonstrated in our daily life. And that's what it's all about, and simply that. And so as we go back to meeting together, let's make sure that always it's about Jesus, that it's all about Jesus, that everything we do is for Jesus, that he just occupies that central space, so that when we meet together, we're meeting with each other and connecting our trust genuinely there as well, but above all, meeting with the King of all kings and knowing that he's the one who died for us and lives for us and reigns until he comes again for us, and we are just caught up in him. And today we're going to do things a little differently, because we're going to spend time now worshipping the Lord and singing songs that allow us to, I trust, truly respond to him. And as I've always encouraged you, again I'd say to you, in your own home, you just worship the Lord with all your heart. If you want to switch your camera off, if you want to, switch off the whole meeting now, leave the meeting, and you just worship the Lord yourself. Jesus is there with you in your room right now. He's there to meet with you, to connect with you, to fill you with his Spirit, to anoint you for his work, to overpower you and bless you and just thrill you with something new that you've never seen before, that you might climb a little higher today, reach a little further, just know him that bit better. So by all means, if you leave, I'm quite glad of that, if it means that you're just connecting with Jesus in your own way. As we sing these songs together, I trust they'll help you to connect with Jesus in a very real way, that you'll be able to sing the words and mean every word you sing, and that as you do so, you'll just feel the presence of Jesus with you. And at the end of it, we're not going to close in prayer, we're not going to say our goodbyes, I'm just simply going to switch you off and switch me off. And what I'd encourage you is carry on. Don't say, okay, that's it, all over, another week gone. Carry on worshipping, carry on reading the word, carry on waiting on God, carry on just opening your heart up to be filled with his Spirit, that you have your encounter with Jesus. Because ultimately it's about that. It's not about me connecting you to Jesus, it's about you meeting Jesus for yourself. And that's the beauty, I think, of this experience of relative isolation and lockdown. Maybe you'll speak to nobody at all for the whole week, but Jesus is there to connect with every day, and you can use that time to develop your relationship with him and learn to listen, because that's what we need to be and to do, to be in that place where he fills us, where he's everything to us, and we just live in him and for him, and he lives in us and through us. And so now let's turn to worship him. You just picture that vision there, that balloon bursting there, and the gold falling down, and that little nugget being there. You pick that up now. Seek the gold. Seek the gold. Reach out to find your connection, your personal connection with Jesus. That as we worship him, he'll just invade your whole life. He'll just fill you with his Spirit. Seek the gold. And day by day, remember that phrase, seek the gold. Gold is connection with Jesus. So now let's do it together. Let's seek the gold now. And let's do it every day of our lives as we use this time wisely for Jesus.
And we can worship him with all of our hearts. Let's just lift him up. Let's just glorify the Lord, because he is so great. He is so wonderful. He is so faithful. I will worship with all of my heart.
I will praise
Jesus, be the center, be my source, be my guide, Jesus. Jesus, be the center, be my hope, be my song, Jesus, be the fire in